game day more efficiently. I'm your host, Rob Cressy, and joining me today is Russ Wilde, COO at Front Office Sports. Russ, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Excited to chat through everything we got going on today, and a little bit about sports and tech and anything else you want to throw my way.
Can you give a quick overview on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm the COO of Front Office Sports, and we are a publisher sort of at the intersection of business and sports, right? So what that means is we cover how sports intersects with technology, fashion, retail, real estate, sort of you name it, with really sort of, for us, it's kind of just a different sort of lens or perspective at looking at the sports industry. That's sort of what we're after through our editorial coverage.
So, one, I'm happy to be jamming with you because you and I first connected years ago, and through it, I've had Adam White on my podcast numerous times, and you and I have jammed numerous times. And I love rooting for brands and companies of people that do things right. I love how you're innovating. I love seeing the growth. So I just wanted to shout out everyone on your team as well as yourself because I love seeing the growth that you've had so far.
Yeah, it's geez, we've known each other for what, Rob, like 5-6 years at this point.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting. So we've really been a full business for probably 18 months now, but Adam sort of started it back in 2014 and we've been kind of cranking out content since then. But it's been fun to kind of see the evolution of FOS and us and our brand and everything that we've done. And we got excited for the team that we have in place today and the pieces we're going to kind of add going forward.
And you mentioned something that I believe is extremely important for anyone that wants to start their own company, because you said it's only been really the last 18 months, but guess what? There is all that work that happened before this. And I always like to look at my own journey. And someone once said to me, Rob, if you ever hope to get paid to do what you love, you better be doing it already. So anytime someone starts a company, a lot of times you're doing this on a hustle and grit, and you're making no money or limited money while you continue to let this thing blossom and you keep moving forward day after day after day until you can get to a point where you say, wow, we're really doing this as a real company. And then you're like, oh, we're starting back at zero again because you went from zero to the next step, but now you're back down to zero again to build this for real.
Yeah, it's there's Adam actually shared with our team like 2 or 3 weeks ago in one of our emails, like this concept of from James Clear of like continuous sort of improvement or constant sort of iteration of a product and a business. And it's like that stuff's real. Like we were working on this from 2014 to 2017 before Adam graduated. I'm about 2 years older. And it was like little by little, like, first you have 10 followers, then you have 100, then you have, 10,000 people reading you, and sort of everything you do adds up over time. Like incremental sort of steps is how you build something, bigger than you, I guess. And it's been really fun for us to kind of see that evolution. And before it was sort of like, oh, it's Russ and Adam on the blog, like they're doing cool stuff, and people were more admired sort of like our work ethic and what we were doing, not necessarily the work, because just the quality might not have been there 5-6 years ago. And then now it's like people see like they're less in admiration of what we're doing, more in sort of like the brand and what we've built itself, if that makes sense. And like just the level is different, right? Like we're breaking news now, we're really sort of an authority in and around the space. And I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I think we launched our Rising 25 class, which is effectively, a 30 under 30, if you will, for the sports industry, 25 under 25, sort of celebrating young folks who are really making an impact in their organizations. And when we launch an initiative like that today, like it just blows up, and we get texts from everybody saying like me and Adam get texts where it's like, hey, love the announcement. Like I saw a couple of my buddies on there, or saw, one of my colleagues on there. And that's like when we announce those like large sort of initiatives, or we break a big scoop or something, like that's when we really feel it. Like people care about us getting these scoops or doing positive things. Like it's cool to see, and just, it's different. Like they're not saying like good work. They're saying like, just different things like, hey, like this actually makes an impact now.
So I'm an avid reader. The book that you were referencing by James Clear, Atomic Habits, I highly recommend that. And then there's another book that I recommend called Kaizen, One Small Step at a Time. And really, the philosophy of Kaizen is, you always hear the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And it's the same concept. And I actually think it's a great transition to fan engagement and community building, because a lot of times people or companies in building a brand, whether it's your personal brand or an actual company, they don't see immediate results. I think this is also great for people who want to create a podcast or build a YouTube channel. They do it for a week or a month, and then they see, wow, I've only got 17 people listening to my podcast, or I only have 400 followers, and they give up. But what they fail to realize is, I believe it's on average, it takes anywhere from 7 to 11 times for someone to see your brand before they engage with it. So with that mindset, you have to continually do this. But also in the standpoint of building your business, this wasn't something where we're building this just for 1 year. It's brick after brick. And I can even give you an example from myself yesterday. On an entrepreneurial journey, or any journey, you're going to have highs and lows, and certainly on the emotional side of things. Some days when you do your Rising 25, you're like, this is the greatest thing in the world. I'm so excited. Yeah. Everybody's happy for us. But then like a week later, you're just sitting there and it's like 2:30 on a Wednesday, and you're like, man, I just feel low about where I am right now in my journey. And why are we doing this? And are we on the right path and everything? And what we fail to realize oftentimes is the brick by brick philosophy of how you're going to get to where you were. Because if you were to think about back in 2014, for you to be where you are right now, you'd be like, holy smokes, this is incredible. I'm so happy. But it's hard at times when you're in the moment and you're not always feeling that jolt, because every day isn't always puppy dogs and rainbows.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And I think another sort of, to that point of like somebody needs to see your brand X amount of times before sort of engaging with you or really taking a liking to your brand. Brian Morrissey at Digiday has reminded me and Adam that, and we're a business now, right? So like a core indicator of business success is revenue. So for us, it's like Brian always says that sales is a lagging indicator of brand. Nobody's going to buy something or advertise with you or work with you if they don't know your brand. And so as you sort of build that, like you reap the benefits today of the work that you put in 6 months, a year, 5 years ago. So, we definitely see that. And it's been an exciting last 18 months since we started taking this thing full time and ramped everything up.
So let's talk about the publishing side of what you do, because I believe the publishing industry is a challenging one. I have experience in doing that. I did it for 3 years before I sort of transitioned to more of a content creation agency model, because with publishers, we saw the monetization change when it went from desktop to mobile, and then organic social traffic. There was an arbitrage that a lot of publishers took advantage of. And then that sort of went away with Facebook and Instagram saying, hey, we want you to pay for your traffic. So now all of a sudden the monetization for a publisher, you have to get a lot more creative, and it's no longer just a straight banner ads side of things. I'm curious on your end, how you see the publishing industry, because you're in it on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's two sort of interesting dynamics right now that we kind of see playing out. One is like how editorial or content creation sort of talent is interfacing with media companies. And you see that with all the Call Her Daddy stuff that's been happening. You see that with even publishers or media companies like ESPN, right? Like these media companies have this huge platform. They have this audience. People come into that environment. They build their personal brands sort of like, by attaching themselves and having all those viewers and things like that. And that's creating sort of like an interesting shift where it's like, is talent, editorial or content creation sort of talent on the front end? Is the media company, like, how do those two items sort of interplay, right? Like and there's issues where like talent is becoming bigger than the media company they work for. Or conversely, like there's issues with sort of the model between, if you're a podcaster and you're working with, insert media company here, and your podcast is doing 10 million downloads a month, pretty around a reasonable number, like how much that's worth to the company you work for. And it's like you have these media companies that sort of launch these individual careers, which is great for everyone. The media companies profit handsomely. The individual creators, 9 times out of 10 profit very well. But it's like how those two things are sort of interplaying as channels like newsletters and podcasts and sort of like ownable, I guess, audiences. How do those things kind of play out over time? Kind of leading into the second point of like, I think it's really important for publishers to own your audience, right? Like it's great to have 1 million Twitter followers, 1 million Instagram followers, but how are you getting those folks into a domain or into sort of an environment that you actually have access to their information or know who they are and those sorts of things? So that's something that we're more of a publisher that's in a very specific sort of area, right? So it's the intersection of business and sports. And I think for us, I think we've been able to grow because we haven't really left that sort of channel. Like we've been creating content for this, specific area for the last 5-6 years, which has allowed us to build our audience or build our credibility with a very specific audience. And so that's why when we bring in folks from the editorial side, like, yes, they're helping sort of FLS, but we're also helping them because it's putting their content to a very specific type of individual who wants that sort of content. So I think those are sort of all the things that are a little bit at play, and what publishers, I guess, are sort of like have to figure out how those things kind of, affect their business going forward.
So let's dig a little bit deeper into this because I think this is an extremely important point that you made about owning your audience. And this is something for every single person and company out there because it's going to relate to marketing as well as fan engagement, because so often it's easy to say, hey, let's just build out our social channels and call that a day. But as we previously said, that one day Facebook had 50% organic reach. And the next day they're like, oh, you know what? We don't like that anymore. Now we want you to pay for all that organic reach is now 4%. And you're like, oh my God, what do you do? So the two channels that you talked about, newsletter and podcast. And for me, I think what I enjoy most about front office is actually the newsletter side of things. Everybody has their own medium, but that's also why you create multiple mediums, because you want to reach your target audience wherever they are, but you also want to give them the ability to build that relationship. And I continue to hammer this to every single company that I talk to is like, well, Rob, what would you do right now if you're building a brand? I'm like, I would invest in newsletter and podcast. Why? Yeah. Because for lack of a better term, you own that audience. Tomorrow, John Newsletter isn't going to come to you and say, hey, Russ, all of a sudden you need to pay us more money in order to reach that audience. The same with podcasting. And the beauty of podcasting is it's a different relationship because your audience is coming to you. Sure, we can promote it on social channels and in the newsletters, but they have to make an active, conscious choice to say, I want to listen to the Front Office Sports podcast. And because of that, it deepens the relationship. And now you have the ability to take a brand and give it a voice and a heartbeat. And now that allows you to build a relationship. And that is a completely different mindset than you or I scrolling through Instagram and seeing 8 million different things where I might like Front Office Sports, but on the next thing, all of a sudden there's a trick shot or a dunk video or something like that. It's just a different environment. So can you talk a little bit more about your mindset on newsletter and podcasting? Because I think it's extremely important when it comes to fan engagement.
Yeah. So I guess the podcast thing is interesting because I think in terms of like owning your audience, you technically, I guess, don't, right? Because Spotify or Apple would sort of like own the audience, right? So but the reason we really like podcasting and our CEO, Adam, has a podcast where he interviews athletes, CEOs sort of in and around the sports space. I was talking with Edgar Walker, who leads sort of audience and strategy for us. And he really likes podcasting as a platform because, some folks watch video podcasts, right? But for the most part, people are listening to podcasts. They're not visualizing it. They're sort of creating that own visualization of the conversation themselves. So it's like a far more sort of impactful just medium because you're like, they're interpreting it. They hear your voice. They hear what you're saying. They're trying to put that it's like an active sort of listenership almost, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but like, it's just a different consumption sort of habit, right? Like if you're browsing on the internet or Twitter, like you might throw a retweet or throw a like and like not even click into the article or something. But podcasting is like, there's a few steps to actually end up downloading that episode. And then when you're consuming it, it's just a different sort of mindset or consumption, I guess, like habit or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting for us. And I think it's something that we want sort of our other reporters to like start launching their own podcasts and going deep on whether it's, Ed, who's crushed our digital media vertical, like having him start a digital media podcast, or Mike on the media side, and a lot of talent sort of stories, like, go interview Mike Greenberg or, whoever sort of for your pod. So it's something that we're looking at and are interested in. And yeah, it's definitely, you see the numbers that are getting thrown around from Spotify, these other groups. It's impressive. There's a lot there.
So let that be a learning lesson right there, because you want to always be a student of the game. So when I saw Spotify purchase The Ringer, and then you saw Spotify recently purchase Joe Rogan's show to come onto that platform right there, and then you saw Penn National purchase a large stake in Barstool Sports, and you're like, what do all three of these media companies have in common? Well, a large majority of what they're doing is on the podcasting side of things. And with podcasting, let's call it 80% of downloads and audience is actually from iTunes. And I think I actually heard this on Erica Nardini's podcast, where she said Spotify right now might be 12 to 15% of the market, but it continues to grow right there. And the big challenge has been in podcasting that Apple, this is just sort of like, we don't really care about it, but because we had iTunes, we're the biggest. But now Spotify is saying, wait a second, we want to change that. And there's a huge opportunity there. So for creators and for companies out there, if you follow the dollars in the market, they're saying something about the power of podcasting. And so often people say, Rob, why would I ever create a podcast? There's already a million of them out there. There's no reason why people would listen to this. And I say to them, I don't even believe that the podcasting industry has started yet, because of the amount of potential there is. And on top of that, do you have a podcast? If the answer is no, then you have an opportunity to create this medium where your audience can engage with you. So the competition is irrelevant when it comes to podcasting, because just like you having a newsletter, would you say, Rob, don't create a newsletter because Front Office Sports has one? No, it's mutually exclusive.
Yeah. And we actually just ran a poll in our newsletter yesterday, the day before, and at this point, 30% of the folks that read our newsletter listen to podcasts on Spotify. And I was looking at some numbers like that. There was some report like last year where it was around 10%. So like, obviously it's our audience. It's not like it's not like a mass sort of, research study or something like that. But just seeing a 10% to 30% number, like Spotify is obviously taking it very seriously and making sort of, business moves to kind of, illustrate that they want to be the go-to sort of platform for podcasters and podcasting and consumption in general.
Yeah, and if you want to think about why would you do podcasting and newsletter on top of everything that we just talked about, it really comes down to dialogue with your audience, because you want to give them that opportunity to engage. So when you look at your social media marketing, if you were to post a 1-minute snippet from a podcast, hey, what do you think? Boom, now you get to be in conversation with them. And so often that's where a lot of brands fail on the fan engagement side of things. They think the simple act of posting something means that their job is done, but really you need to continue that conversation and find unique ways that you can continue that dialogue. And newsletter and podcasting is a great way to let that heartbeat shine and get that dialogue going.
Yeah, no, it's I think for any sort of these, new age media companies, it's important. And even companies, the New York Times, the Daily does millions and millions of downloads a day. So it's also not just something that, emerging new media companies are looking at. Everybody does it. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, they all do. And that, that's sort of an indicator too of like, it's not, anybody could do it, right? It's not just sort of like only for brands that are sort of more emerging or something like that. Like, it's important just to continue to kind of build these different channels, because people also have different consumption habits, right? Like if you're a CEO, you might only have 15 minutes to catch up on your news in the morning. How are you going to, what's the easiest way to do that? Something that lands directly in your inbox that you can scroll through, skim it real quick when you're walking to your office, or, walking to sort of, just around doing your morning routine. Like that's sort of where, I think people sort of like worry about, oh, I'm sharing the same message across 10 different platforms. Well, people have different consumption habits, so you have to sort of curtail to as many folks as possible and put things in front of them directly sometimes to get them to read it or whatever. But
yeah, and a simple tip for that is space it out. Do one
yeah,
at 10 a.m., one at noon, one at 2 p.m., change the different channels. Because
right.
remember, organic reach, only a small percentage see each one of those things. So let's move things over to the technology side of things and or what we're seeing in the market right now. One of the things that I really enjoy about front office sports is you do have a pulse on the sports and business landscape. And technology is a big part of it. I saw that there was an article on the site right now about how NASCAR is engaging fans at home. And that is something that is an intersection of sports, technology, and fan engagement, and in
Right.
a very good way, in a forward-thinking way. Because what do you do when fans aren't able to actually attend your games or races live? So I'm curious from your standpoint, what are you seeing out there in the market of brands or companies that are using technology good, and or what that might be?
Yeah, I think the biggest sort of area right now, like when sports shut down in mid-March, like you had some organizations like the Phoenix Suns that were like, real quick, hop on it. How do we figure out a way to create content that like doesn't have to do with players or sort of games and things like that? And so they launched, they basically started streaming simulations, or they were streaming a 2K, 2K NBA games sort of on their Twitch channel and things like that. And like, I think the interesting thing for us to look at is like which teams are like, okay, this happened, let's get something out today, and the ones that have kind of waited the last 8-10 weeks, which is fine. Like innovate as people that are sort of gonna do things a little bit more quickly, like it's impressive. They'll get a lot of sort of they'll get a lot of PR buzz and things like that. But it's been interesting to kind of see how a lot of the tech companies and startups in the space are now maybe changing their messaging to curtail to these teams and try to say, hey, look, like this is how we can help you sort of adjust for not having fans in seats, or having to build social distancing measures or rules, and how we can kind of help you enforce those and things like that. I think it's the biggest thing for teams right now in leagues is how are they going to be able to just keep fans connected. Like I think people are craving live sports, and when things come back, that's going to be great. But at the end of the day, they're going to be losing out on millions and millions of dollars of folks sort of not spending in stadium, right? So, how are they going to find ways to, one, once things do open up, get people back into stadiums and arenas, and two, sort of in that period, like make sure that fans still feel connected to the teams and these brands, and make sure that they're able to monetize, whether it's through merch or additional sponsorship opportunities and things like that. So I think a lot of it is still up in the air. Like, there's isolated sort of instances of teams that are, launching new platforms or new products and things like that. But I think a lot of folks are still just trying to figure it out. And that's because there's been so much sort of movement the last couple of months that, nobody knows when games are coming back. Yeah, they kind of have an idea, but it's just tough. Like things change every day sort of in the new environment. So, it'll be interesting to kind of see how things play out over the next couple of weeks and months.
So one of the things that has certainly emerged is the use of Zoom in being able to use it to create content. And I saw
Yeah.
you guys have an article up about how cheerleaders are now doing auditions virtually. And really, I think there's such a big opportunity for any company or team to use Zoom to be able to create content in a way that they otherwise may not have thought of doing. I'm curious from your standpoint, and even with front office, how has the use of Zoom allowed you to create more, or the industry create more?
Yeah, so we have our show Fundamentals, which airs on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's hosted by Ian Thomas, our editor, and so we've been using Zoom just to launch a new show twice a week, and I think that's something where people specifically, a month or two ago, like you'd get guests that probably you wouldn't have gotten in the past because everyone's stuck at home. So like, that's just the thing where it's like, hey, like hop on the show for 30 minutes, we'll do an interview. Like, cool, let's do it. When previously they might say like, oh, I'm busy, or oh, I have meetings and things like that. So it's been good for us there. And I think as a team, we've always used Google Hangouts. And we actually have, so myself, I'm based in California. We have one person, Pat, in LA or Vegas, one in Portland, one in Denver. So we were already like slightly distributed, I guess, with our team. So we had been using, Zoom or Hangouts just for our weekly all hands and for other sort of team meetings. So for us, it was probably like a built-in easier transition just because we were used to using sort of conferencing technology. But I'm excited sort of at how our editorial team has now sort of taken that and built content using platforms like this.
Do you think that'll speed up the rate of innovation because now people understand simply how quickly you can create something just by pushing a button?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think like, I guess people are just more comfortable with it. Like it was always there, but I think it's more sort of, it's more easily, I guess, accessed, right? Like it's not weird to ask somebody to hop on a Zoom call anymore. It's just normal. So I think that those instances, sure. And I think that's just, it's just an adoption sort of thing, right? Like people are more comfortable with it now.
You have a very forward-thinking mindset. I'm curious, from the world of sports and business and technology, what's on your mind right now, or what should we be looking at?
Yeah, that's a very, very broad question. I guess one thing, I just am really sort of interested in how teams really start to operate like media companies and leagues as well in that regard, right? Like I think, I don't think it's crazy to say that teams are going to sort of have their own, like teams could have their own sort of subscription where they're producing content, behind the scenes content with the athletes that are, that are in their staff or on their team, and like go behind the scenes of how LeBron is sort of like, working out every day or doing documentary sort of style content like that. I think there's some issues in terms of like, the players associations and the teams and what sort of those asks and what sort of those revenue opportunities look like, I guess, like, where that revenue split is. But I think as teams have all this IP, right? They have the IP of the athletes, the brands themselves, the staff members, right? Like people that work in the front office. I think there's a lot of interesting stories that, maybe teams don't want to kind of showcase that to their audiences all the time. But like, if you're able to kind of, people are interested in it. Like we're an example of that. We cover sports business. We have an audience. Like I know there's people that's interested in the front office inner workings, and it's just a matter of how comfortable people are and teams are at sort of like opening up, their meetings and things like that to cameras. But I guess that's, as teams really get smart about sort of monetizing their content and their brand overall, like finding different ways of sort of tapping into their brand and, whether it's selling products or content, whatever that looks like.
I really love that idea, because will we see a team in the way to try and make up for potentially lost revenue saying, hey, here's a subscription service for more content? Because we saw the success of The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary. Of course, that's a unicorn in general because it's Michael Jordan and everything going on. But there is an element of storytelling with Netflix where we are coming a little bit more accustomed to that. At the same time, documentaries are extremely expensive to create. So it's not something they're going to be making a ton of money for. So as I'm sort of marinating on all this while you're talking, what about the potential for these teams? So for example, I'm from Pittsburgh, so I'm a Steelers fan. What if they could create a podcast network for their players? What if James Conner could have a weekly show on there where he's interviewing Juju, or the ability, like you said, to create a media company where they have all of those people already in their brand, like you talked about in the beginning? What if they said, hey, we'll help you leverage this platform. We'll put this behind a paywall. Now for $4.99, become a Steelers Plus subscriber, get access to inside information, and maybe the players have more control over the narrative.
Yeah, or even retired players, like a way to kind of get around a lot of the issues in terms of like the CBA and working with current players is hey, go get your former quarterback who's interested in media is instead of him going to ESPN or NFL Network, just build it under the Steelers umbrella. And I think the other sort of opportunity there too is like the NFL team, right? You have 16 or whatever, 20 games if you have like preseason and things like that. That's 20 days a year. There's a lot of opportunities the other 300 and whatever 50 something days a year where it's like have watch parties, have events with your former athletes and monetize that, right? I think a lot of teams do that and sort of have it serve as a client engagement sort of tool for season ticket holders and corporate sponsors. But why don't you build an event with, you know, your former retired 6-time Pro Bowler, you know, and sell tickets to it, like create additional inventory outside of the, you know, folks that are going to attend the 8 or 10 home games that you have a year. So I think that's, you know, that's something that as teams, they're trying to sort of stretch the calendar, if you will, you know, for ticketed events and things like that. And I think, you know, a live podcast with your former, you know, former Pro Bowlers are probably a good way to do that. In addition to, you know, the ability to sell, you know, sell the eyeballs or listeners from an advertising model.
Because we'll wrap it up with this. You know what you said at the beginning of the podcast? You had credibility with a specific audience. Own your audience. So as a Steelers fan, if they were to give me exclusive opportunities on insert anything at any point during the season, hey, Rob, here's a live taping with Jerome Bettis via Zoom, or
Right.
the ability to, like we see before games, a special fan tailgate area. This is the opportunity to allow a deeper connection with that audience. And oh, by the way, we want it. I almost feel like this is an untapped thing for them, where if they said, Rob and Rush, you're now in charge of creating this for the NFL or the teams, we'd be like, oh my goodness, sign me up for all of this stuff.
That'd be fun. That'd be fun for sure. A lot of opportunities.
So NFL, if you're listening, Rob and Russ would love to be able to be your ambassadors to create these internal media companies. Russ, I really enjoyed this conversation with you. I continue to be a fan of you and Adam and everyone on Front Office Sports. Where can everybody connect with you?
Yeah. So at Front Office Sport, FRNTOFFICESPORT, pretty much everywhere. And then myself, it's Russ Wilde Jr., pretty much everywhere.
And as always, I would love to hear from you about this episode. I'm curious, what is on your mindset right now from an intersection of sports and business? Is there a brand or a company that you think is doing a great job right now? If so, we would love to hear about it. You can hit up FanFood on Twitter at FanFood On Demand, on Instagram at FanFood App, or on LinkedIn. And as always, you can hit me up on all social media platforms at Rob Cressy.